Welcome to Tech Talks. I'm Holly Scott. I am pleased to have with me today as a guest Paul Grand. He is the CEO of MedTech Innovator. If you don't know, MedTech Innovator is our industry's global competition and accelerator for medical devices, digital health, and diagnostic companies. Very interesting program, and I'm excited to chat with him about it. Paul and I were fortunate to be at Device Talks last week and had a panel discussion together, and I thought it'd be great to recap. So thanks for joining today, Paul.
Thank you very much, Holly. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. Before we jump in, I thought it would be great for context for our audience to hear a little more about what brought you to MedTech Innovator, you know, the inception of this program, perhaps a little bit more about your background. Could you give us a little history there?
Sure, happy to. So by background, I'm an entrepreneur. I started 8 different companies myself in tech, biopharma, and medtech. And along the way, one of the investors who had invested in my last company, so this is back in like 2003, said, "Hey, we think you'd be a great venture capitalist. Would you be interested in working with us to help some of the companies that they were incubating?" So I started off doing that, and then I thought that might be a year or so that I'd learned the venture capital business. But 12 years later, I was still doing it because I loved being a venture capitalist, loved having the money instead of always going out and looking for the money. And most of all, I loved helping entrepreneurs, working with innovators. And that's really what led to the genesis of MedTech Innovator, which was basically setting up a framework that would allow all these startups to get the access to the world's best talent, best ecosystem for being successful in the med tech business.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So was that based on your VC experience that the idea came together for this? Because it functions as a innovator accelerator. What happened? Because going from a VC to this organization, that must have been a pretty big leap for you.
Well, I'll tell you, it was not that big a leap because the venture fund that I worked for, the venture firm, is called Research Corporation Technologies, or RCT Ventures, and it has a long history in very early stage innovation. So working with innovators at the earliest stages, a lot of them being spin-outs from universities and you know, very, very early companies, first money in kind of investments, and going all the way back to 1912 in its history.
Wow.
So very, very old firm with you know, with a legacy that was really entirely driven by that early spin-outs, as I said, from universities. And so most of my early days as a venture capitalist was spent walking the halls at universities, literally talking to, you know, to scientists and physicians and others who had innovations that they wanted to spin out of the university. So very early stuff. And the work that I would do with MedTech Innovator in the early days when we first started was focused on a very particular thing we were trying to solve. And the reason it fits so synergistically with what I was doing is, as an investor in those very early stage companies, when we crossed the last financial crisis, so not the current one, but the prior one, when we had that era, almost all the early stage sophisticated venture investors disappeared, who had funds that matured in the 2010 time period. That was pretty much the exit of all the sophisticated medtech investors, as I'm sure you and others there would remember. And so what we were experiencing as early stage investors was running into all these innovators, and me in particular, when I would meet with people, not just at universities, but just anywhere, when I'd find these innovations and they pitched me, I often would find myself saying, God, like, you know, you had some early funding, whether it was from a university and non-dilutive funding, or whether it was equity investment from angels or family offices or other people who were still investing, even though the sophisticated investors had exited. The problem was that these innovators were making all these mistakes that I deemed preventable, you know, mistakes they should not be making. This wasn't a clinical failure This was a tactical failure, something they had done that was just bad advice that they had gotten from someone who had, well-meaning ideas, tech investors who wanted to cross over, let's say, to the healthcare industry, but didn't know anything about bringing medical products to market. And so what I kept finding was literally bad advice that people had been given. And we'd say, boy, I really wish we'd met you a year ago because we could have solved that problem. We could have given you that advice that when you were doing a particular study or something that you should do things differently. But now we can't invest in you, it's too late. And so part of the genesis of MedTech Innovator was to literally solve for bad advice that these people were getting. They were still getting funding, but they were getting a lot of guidance from people who didn't know what they were doing. And so it was a very easy transition for me to say, hey, let's help these companies because we want to make them better investments for us. We want them to be better acquisitions when these companies actually, make it, if they make it to market. And we had the same discussions with strategics, people at J&J and others who would say, yeah, boy, this is a common problem. I remember Susan Morano when she was at J&J in those days saying, God, this is kind of like a time machine. Like if we could have a medtech time machine and go back and meet these companies a year earlier and give them some good advice. Wow, what an impact we could have. And a lot of that was the genesis behind MedTech Innovator.
There's so much to be said for doing it right first in our industry, really, especially with our background. We work primarily with young companies, and so many over the years I've seen miss the final success, whether it's final approval or final commercialization, because of something that they didn't know earlier in. So getting in early and helping them support. So your services then, before we talk about the services, perhaps you could share, how would you get involved with MedTech Innovator? So I'm an entrepreneur, I've got a phenomenal idea. Of course they all do, right? But how would we get involved? How would we approach you or your team to potentially be a candidate for partnership?
So most of the applicants to MedTech Innovator follow the exact same path, which is they apply to MedTech Innovator just on our website. So it's medtechinnovator.org, and there's always a big apply link in the corner and make it really easy for people. That's the entry point for most of the applicants. For about 20% of the applicants every year, they're coming from nominations. They're coming from referrals from one of our alumni. We have 500 alumni at this point, so they're all referring companies to us. And a lot of investors refer to us as well, because we're not your typical accelerator. And we'll get into maybe what MedTech Innovator is, I'm sure, in this discussion, but we're not your typical accelerator where it's a couple people with an idea who are looking to start a company. That's more like Y Combinator, or that's more like some of the earlier accelerators that you would find out there. We're more like the graduate school of accelerators, where people have a team and they have prototypes and they have some early funding, and now they want to make sure they succeed, make sure they get the right access to the right vendors, to the right strategics, to the right investors, so that they're going to have their best path to success versus just working with the people who are down the street, which unfortunately is all too common. Where they have just the wrong attorneys, the wrong vendors, the wrong investors, or people, as I said, giving them bad advice. So we kind of say we want to bring the world's best ecosystem to the world's best startups. So they just, as I said, they're either nominated or they apply. Most of them just apply directly.
And then they're involved, and they have access to all of those services mentioned. They have access to advice on, say, reimbursement or payer channels, or legal advice, or IP, or a commercialization strategy, design, development, clinical, regulatory, the whole gamut?
The answer is yes. So the whole gamut. What we do is we're not running a 101 style, here's how to start a company accelerator. We're past all that, right? So we're focused on going through these companies' development plans, their clinical plans, their reimbursement and payment plans, value propositions, and making sure that they have all those things in place, in line with what is needed to be successful. And it's customized for every single company. So we don't say, oh, you guys are you three companies are the same, you just do these things. Everything is customized for each company. So we're doing an assessment before we accept them into the program to make sure that we are going to offer the most value possible to the highest value companies. And then once they get into the program, everyone, we go through every aspect of their plan and match them up with the right people to make sure that they're getting just the best advice possible.
You mentioned the ecosystem and the community. Is there a sense of community amongst these leaders? Do they spend time together? Do they have opportunities to share struggles, headwinds, tailwinds, and the like?
Yeah, we are. There's a lot of different people use different analogies, whether you want to say we're like the Harvard Business School of MedTech, the McKinsey of MedTech, whatever alumni network you want to think about as being really strong. That's what we are. So you have each year, there's the year's cohort forms very strong relationships with each other. And increasingly, we're getting better and better at cross cohort involvement, where you get people from prior years to help companies in the newer companies, and vice versa, by the way, because our companies are all in varying stages. We have companies that go anywhere from preclinical to commercial when they start in MedTech Innovators. Some start when they're already on the market. And usually because they're not in the US market and they want to commercialize in the US market. Or other times they're in the US market already, but they're so early in that commercialization, there's so much more room for them to still grow. Mm-hmm. And we help them with that. But yes, we have 500 plus graduates who collectively are responsible each year for about 25% of the overall capital that's raised in the sector is going to our graduates at this point. So a massive number of the new innovators and the emerging innovators are MedTech Innovator graduates at this point. And I think that's probably the most valuable part of what we offer is access to this exclusive network of successful emerging MedTech companies.
Without question, that stat hit me between the eyes last week when we were talking about it. 1 in 4 really raising capital, where I know industry average is, well, we used to say 8 out of 10 fail. I don't know. It could be worse in the last few years. It's been pretty tough. So having that support and that backbone is an integral first step to getting on the right road.
Yeah, and actually, Holly, to clarify too, it's not that 1 out of 4 raised capital. It's that 1 out of $4 being raised in the entire sector is going to one of our companies each year. So I would actually say our graduates are more like 9.5 out of 10 are raising capital when they try to raise capital. Mm-hmm. We have a very, very high success rate in our graduates in raising capital. And that's definitely an anomaly. If you look across the overall sector, we're only accepting about 4% of our applicants each year, between 4 and 5% annually. And there's a lot of failures out there. They just happen to not be in our portfolio. Mm-hmm.
Well, you have it sounds like a bidirectional process that allows for you both to set up well for success, make sure that you have the right entries, the right partnerships set up from the beginning. So the success rate is high. What would the commitment be from an entrepreneur? Are they offering you equity in the company, or how does that work?
So MedTech Innovator is a nonprofit, and we are entirely funded by a combination of the industry. So strategics, for example, are a large part of our funding. Federal agencies. So we have funding that comes to us from a number of different federal agencies. And then finally, philanthropy is becoming a large part of our funding as well. And so essentially, we're aligned with anybody who wants to see medical technology succeed in reaching patients and with as much value as possible. Those are the people who fund us. And so that allows us to not charge the companies anything. We're not taking equity in their companies for participation in MedTech Innovator. There's a separate fund that does invest in MedTech Innovator graduates called the MedTech Advantage Fund, but that is a completely separate entity. MedTech Innovator itself is not taking anything for participation. So that allows us to have a very, very clean alignment when it comes to all the different participants. There's no strings attached. So even though a big part of this is corporate mentorship by one of the many strategics who are part of MedTech Innovators annual program, they don't have any particular rights. They just get unique relationships with these companies.
What value, what immense value that could be for the right entrepreneur. So there's really essentially no downside to trying, right? To get in there and share ideas and continue to raise innovation. That's fantastic. And as an entrepreneur, you know, you've been in their seat so many times and sitting across the table and looking at it from not an operator, but yet from a consult and a mentor. It must be pretty tough to make these decisions along the way of who we're going to back, who not, and to screen down who is going to be a partner, who is not going to be. That must be tough, and you must have some interesting stories. Are there any that you think of when you think of, boy, this was quite a success, or this was quite challenging?
Well, I'll tell you, you're right. It is the most difficult part is exactly where we are right now in terms of the calendar and the year. Tomorrow is the day that we have our big selection committee meeting where we choose the companies that will be in this year's cohort. And we're going from 1,800 plus applicants down to about 90 in total. And that's across all three of our cohorts, which includes the US focus program, our Asia program, and our life science tools program. But the majority of them are in our US focus program. That's about 60 of the companies. And this is the most agonizing part for me. As you said, it's very, very difficult. One of the things that I love is, and you know, compared to being an investor, where typically as a venture investor, if you do 2 deals in a year as an individual, that's a good year. 3 deals would be a lot to do as an individual, not as a firm perhaps, but as an individual. At MedTech Innovator, we invite about 20% of our applicants to pitch us in person and to pitch our partners in person. And when I say our partners, I don't mean just like a handful of people. I mean, we'll have our big pitch events that we just are concluding now. We'll have 130, 150 evaluators there to meet with anywhere from 40 to 80 startups at each of these events that we hold. And those have been pre-selected by all of our strategics. So the strategics, just like going to a partnering conference where you say, oh, I'd like to meet with so-and-so, we do that in advance of each of these events. And we only invite the companies to pitch that our strategic partners are interested in. So they're already kind of pre-vetted in that way. And we invite, as I said, about 20% of the applicants. So we just met with roughly 380 companies across all of our cohorts for the last several months. And we traveled around to meet with them in different places. They traveled to meet with us in most cases as well. And our partners traveled too. And we go through, so the thing that I love is even if we don't accept them, these 300 plus startups just got a chance to meet with strategics, investors, clinicians, and other customers, payers, FDA, and so on. They got to meet with the key stakeholders and service providers, by the way, being one of the most important stakeholders, who are going to be part of their journey someday. So even if we don't accept them, they just got an incredible opportunity to meet all these people. And the ones that are the best out of that bunch will accept. The next batch will probably apply again next year, and we'll accept them then. But so coming back, I really just kind of to what your question was. I agonize over this because I want to make sure the best companies are getting accepted, and managing that process, managing all of our strategic partners, all the input from 500 or so people who've weighed in on these companies over the last 4 months of our process, and going through all of that and saying which of all those companies are the best companies to have in MedTech Innovator is a very let's say a labor of love. It is not just a look at the pay line like NIH and say, okay, they cross the pay line, they get funded. Mm-hmm. In our case, we're saying, we're going back and forth and we're splitting hairs over, we'll go into our selection committee call tomorrow with, I'm sure, at least 90 companies to talk about out of the for the US program, out of over 200, meaning that 90 companies will still be on the table for tomorrow. And we'll come out of that with only 60 for the US program. And I can promise you those other 30 are all, they're already on the list because people have raised their hand and said, I want to work with that company after our road tour. So now we have to, as I said, split hairs to pick which of those 30 are not going to make it, if you will. And that is for me, that's the most stressful part of all this. But to your question, to the final part of your question, which is stories, it's the best part. The best part of this process is being in that meeting tomorrow and listening to senior leadership at some of the largest companies in the medtech industry pounding on the table and telling us, convincing us why these startup companies need to be in MedTech Innovator. And that is the most pleasurable part of all this, is to look across the table and watch these people be the champion for these little startups. And that is just a very unique thing. It's not something, this is not like a typical, pitch day where you just kind of like clap a little bit and give somebody a check. These companies are now going to get mentored by all these strategics and be on the industry's largest stages, get access to, millions in funding and all sorts of things that they just wouldn't normally get. And so, it's agonizing for me to make sure that we get the right ones, but it's also incredible to sit there and to watch the process.
I can only imagine that being I wish I were a fly on the wall in that room. That energy must be just exorbitant with the people who are so passionate about the innovation, and they're all there for the same purpose, and they come together, the thought leaders of the thought leaders of the thought leaders, to weigh in on this. And I do feel for all of those entrepreneurs that are not sleeping tonight and waiting for this moment. But I'm sure it'll be a great day. I'm sure it'll be a great day. And I can appreciate you still having continued empathy, even though the numbers are big, as they whittle down, that each individual has their own road. And appreciate the fact too that you encourage those who may not have made it to take this experience and either come back next year or allow it to take lessons with them to go out and do things a different way. Yeah. Indeed.
The encouraging people to do it again, to apply again is a really important part of this. We're not looking to have people reapply just to have them reapply. We only want people to reapply if we think they have a good chance of being accepted in the following year. Mm-hmm. We have some companies that when I ask, as I will do when we kick off our accelerator in June at our MedTech Innovator Summit, right before the Wilson Sonsini annual medical device meeting, I'll look out across all the entrepreneurs in the room and I'll say, how many of you applied in a prior year? And more than half their hands will go up. And then a bunch of them will yell out something like, this is my third year applying. We've had companies apply 4 years in a row. We've been doing this for over a decade now. So we have people who literally have been applying for 3 or 4 years before they get accepted. We always say it's the right time for the right company. But ultimately, it's some combination of making sure they have the evidence for us to make the decision. Because, a great idea is just a great idea. Adding in, a great team, okay, so there's some value there. But ultimately, we need the evidence that what they're trying to do is going to work. This isn't the tech industry where you go, oh, great founders, they'll figure it out. Mm-hmm. They'll pivot, they'll figure it out. We're just trying to lure in the founders. That's not what we're doing at MedTech Innovator. While that team is critical, it's not just about the founders and a good idea. For us, we know how hard it is. It's unreasonably difficult to succeed in this industry, as you know very well, Holly, and your entrepreneurs who you work with know. This is a very difficult business to be successful in. And so, that evidence is a critical part of it. And sometimes we'll just say, look, you you don't have enough here for us to be convinced, come back next year when you do. And because we want to make sure we're, if we're going to be giving all this advice and spending all this time mentoring these companies now over the next 4+ months in our accelerator, we want to make sure that advice is going to be time well spent.
Yeah, you have to be efficient on it, and I can tell, and I'm sure you're validate. There's probably some that, without naming names, that you've had soft spots for over the years, but they may, from a leadership perspective, but perhaps they could or could not get the logical, tactical piece of the equation settled to where it made sense or didn't make sense. That's got to be tough works to push through on those.
The softest part, the hardest part for us, maybe as you put it, the soft spot is for the entrepreneur who is not, in some cases, is not a strategic fit. So ultimately, when we make these selections, as I mentioned, it's a corporate accelerator as part of what we're doing. So they have to match up with, a Zimmer Biomet or a Johnson & Johnson or Olympus or Edwards Life Sciences and the other 8 or so strategics that are working with us. If they're not a fit for one of all of those strategics, as I said, there's a lot of them, and we do cover most of the entire industry, or they're either not a fit or there's not enough bandwidth at that strategic. So if we say, oh, it's a structural heart company, and that might be a fit for Biosense Webster or for J&J, or it's in the heart space, let's say. There's only so many of our partners, Asahi Intech, there's others who are covering that sector. And at a certain point, they'll each go, okay, I can do this. I can do 5 companies. I can do 4 companies. I can do 6 companies, wherever the number might be. And there's going to be more companies than we can accommodate. And so, that's another place where you go, oh my God, that company is an amazing company. Everything's right. We just don't have enough strategics to mentor them, which is one of the reasons why we're always looking for new partners to join MedTech Innovator, because that increases our bandwidth to help companies. It's not just a dollar amount for our overall funding. It's also just physically having the mentors who, and I don't mean somebody who's going to have a casual conversation. Those are easy. I can do that with anybody. I'm talking about someone who's going to talk to these companies every other week for the next 4 months, and have regular meetings and sometimes fly out and meet with them and all sorts of things. So it's actually a highly engaged program. And so that's where, that's one place where my heart aches for, the company where we go, God, I love that. They pitched us. We love them. The timing is right, but we just don't have enough bandwidth. So we're always asking for more partners. If you're listening and you're a strategic that's not working with us, please reach out to me. And then secondly, the other place that my heart aches always is at the very end of our program. When the accelerator's over, we're fortunate to be able to feature these companies at the AdvaMed annual meeting, wherever that might be. This year it's in Anaheim. But what we have there is a huge showcase where all of our companies present. They're the only companies that are allowed to present at the AdvaMed annual meeting, our MedTech Innovators current cohort. So we have companies in varying stages for that reason, because we want to make sure the strategics and investors and other attendees are getting to see the best of the best, which is why they've exclusively been having our companies present now since 2015 at the annual meeting. And so that's one part of it. And the other part is the finals competitions. And as you said, you start falling in love with these companies and you want to see them succeed. And part of that is you want them to be on those stages, because it's not about the prize, although yes, we'll give away over $1 million in non-dilutive funding and prizes, and that's great. But you know that just like an American Idol or something else, there's great talent out there that isn't going to be on that final stage and isn't going to be the final winner. And you don't want them to feel badly about that. And I can promise you, by the time we get to the end, they don't feel badly, because they've gotten so much value out of the program. But we feel badly because we agonized in the same way at the end to go, oh my God, who's going to be on those stages? But I would say the secret of why we're able to get through this and do this every year with so much continued enthusiasm from our innovators, is that, and not being horribly disappointed when they don't make it, is that they will all tell you that the program is the prize and not just those final competitions. But I have personally cried while telling some entrepreneur that we've just fallen in love with, that they're not going to make it to the finals. I literally have been there with my team crying as we have to tell them they're not going to make it. So yes, it is difficult, but if it wasn't for this passion, we wouldn't be doing it.
That is so true. That is so true. It's hard, but it's worth it. It's definitely a worthwhile exercise. And we saw some of your brilliance last week with your 22 alumni, MedTech, All-Stars at Device Talks. That was quite an event. We had standing room only for your group.
Yeah, that was a real pleasure. That was an experiment, by the way. This is the first time we've ever done this. So we've been working with Device Talks for several years, but we have never featured alumni in a showcase. And part of one of the new initiatives we have, I mentioned earlier about increasing our support for past graduates, is to feature them in fundraising opportunities, because our companies are, as I said, on an outsized basis, are successful at raising capital, but it still takes them a while, still takes a lot of their time. And I hear all too often from investors, when I announce a company's financing, I don't announce every single one of them because there's so many, but when I do announce them, somebody will always contact me and go, God, I wish I knew they were raising money. And I go, God, well, that was a failure that, those people didn't know about that fundraise. And we'd love to see more investors at the table. We'd love to see competing term sheets. We'd love to see, more opportunity for people to match up with higher value investors. And so this All-Stars presentation was a selection of 22 of our graduates who are currently raising capital from as far back in terms of our graduation. The oldest one was from our 2014 cohort. And these companies are all at varying stages. Some are still at the seed stage, and some are commercial, and they're doing a growth round. We had anywhere from $1 million being raised to $25 million. And so, a huge variety. But this was the first time that we said, hey, let's do our own investor showcase and feature these companies, because they really are the best of the best of the best, as they say. And we want to make sure people know about them. So Tom Salemi and the team at Device Talks was incredibly generous in giving us a lot of floor space at the conference and rooms. As you said, the room was too small. We thought it was going to be plenty big, and it turned out to be too small because there was a lot of people standing in the back throughout the 2 days. But it gave us the opportunity to feature these 22 companies to investors, strategics, and to others who, as you know, Holly, I think are looking maybe for their next job. And there was a lot of people in the audience who were there because they were looking and considering the next gig. And these startups are the best bet I think there is out there for where you should go if you're looking for a gig. I'd look at the MedTech Innovator graduates first, because these companies have capital, great teams, they've been vetted, they have huge unmet need and large opportunities. So yeah, it was highly successful. We're thrilled we did it, and we're definitely be doing more of these All-Stars showcases.
Yeah, it was a tremendous success. 2 of the 3 I couldn't get in because it was so packed, and and then the third one I made sure I got there early so that I could, because I honestly, it was one of my biggest draws. And I told Tom, I said, no offense, but that's one of the reasons that I'm here live, because I love the innovation and seeing them pitch. And they got some nice buzz. I saw the diversity of the panel was amazing. You had people, like you said, growth stage, from seed stage, and technology platform and disease state. There was quite a versatile and robust group. So it was definitely something that everyone could get something from. And each of them were approached by many as they walked out and got some good conversations. I also understand you are to thank for the pop-up panel, which I thought was also one of the most killer content provided within those 2 days.
Yeah, we had the great fortune of having a lot of tremendous investors who were able to come to the conference specifically for the showcase. So this is definitely not, in the past, Device Talks was not a investor conference. And of course, there are investors that come, but it wasn't specifically like an investor event, like you would think of, whether it's MedTech Strategist or an LSI or some of those investor-specific events. But our goal is to start adding that into these conferences. We did the same thing with AdvaMed back at their annual meeting. Together, we had a big effort to go out and find investors and bring them to the event, because this is where everything happens. This is the convergence. So as you said, we were able to draw on some of those investors, and it wasn't on the original agenda, which is why it was called the pop-up panel. But we said, hey, we've got these great investors. Let's give them a chance to talk to the audience as well. And I think that was another standing room only crowd. But I think it was very well received from everything I've heard.
It was incredibly well received. There were a lot of nuggets shared there for those who are, serially raising money right now, which is the position so many of these CEOs get thrown into. When you do anything every single day, you tend to lose focus sometimes. So it was a nice grounding of sorts of what the investors are looking for and how to determine who to pitch to and the climate. It was just really, really good. I'm curious because the market's asking about, data, intelligence, and everything. I just, because of your position as an operator, as an entrepreneur, as now someone who's behind the innovators in the space, the FDA published their annual report last year, and it was surprising to me that really, even with all the activity that we've heard in digital, there's only been a small portion that has been cleared or passed that has a digital component. There were, of the 5,731 authorizations done last year, there were only 47 that were actually done in ML and AI. However, in our business, in the last 2+ years, and from what I'm seeing about market, 85% of new investments and new ideas, innovation, centers around some kind of digital data component. So I was curious for you, as someone who's seeing this and being future forward, has that played into your screening? Has that played into the playbook that is MedTech Innovator? And just curious on your gut on all of this. It'd be helpful to have your insight.
Sure. So it's great. Our data corroborates what you're talking about. So 2 years ago, in 2021, we partnered up with Deloitte, and they said, "Can we have access to your database of applicants?" And look to correlate on their initiative they call the Future of Health, to see did our applicant pool coincide with their vision of the future, where they see things going. And the data point that I'll call out was that 81% of our applicants, so not who we accepted, but the applicants to MedTech Innovator, 81% were doing something other than treating disease. So that means again, the flip, 19% are treating disease. The other 81% are doing something else. And that's generally that preventative or post-acute support, monitoring, or keeping people healthy. And so you're right, when we look at that 81%, see what are all those people doing? It is heavily digital in some way. And they tend to be in that, that group. And again, people who are coming to you to raise capital are also find talent, excuse me. People are coming to you to find talent are probably in the same kind of anomaly category as the people who we're accepting in MedTech Innovator, which is they're the best of the best. They're not going to be able to come to you if they don't have the resources and the support ultimately to hire these teams. And the same thing goes for us, right? We're picking the best companies, and those companies are going to be the most successful ultimately, at least relative to the rest of the pool. And so when we look at these companies, we're going to probably again see an anomaly in terms of our applicants for companies that do have these things that we're talking about, some kind of services component, some kind of non-traditional business model opportunity. That is what, I think, as most people would think, is the future of our business. We know that, and I've heard Joe talk about this many times as well, that the strategics tend to not be as advanced as these startups are in understanding digital technologies. They're catching up, but they're definitely not at the same place. And so the whole industry is looking to this emerging sector of startups to bring these digital technologies into the world of patient care. And so I believe that we're going to see, again, an outsized number of these innovators having those technologies. We see it every year. I mean, our data supports that. It's very rare to see a technology, whether it's a sponge or whether it's an implant, or whether it's something that's just a disposable for a particular procedure. They almost all have some digital services kind of thinking behind them, and model as part of it now. Even the capital equipment companies are rethinking and offering service-based offerings where you don't have to really pay for the equipment and you're just paying on a per click, if you want to call it that in some cases. A lot of that innovation is happening at the startup level. And unfortunately, the difficulty is payment, and figuring in the payment model has not caught up with that innovation. So we're still in this struggle where these startups have the technology, have the model, have the interest from users, and with the exception of some of those early adopters at maybe academic medical centers or places that can take these chances on innovation, a lot of people still run into that wall where the hospital or whomever says, I'm sorry, but I can't buy this yet until you have your code, until you have reimbursement. And that's the mismatch still to this date in our industry. And it's one of the things that, again, we're trying to help solve at MedTech Innovator through various initiatives, and just through our program in general, is really focusing on value and focusing on a program that helps these companies have a recipe for success when it comes to payment. But ultimately, digital is the future. The data is required for people to make decisions, and that's what's going to drive payment. So whether the evidence is collected in the device, whether it's some kind of real world evidence afterwards, there's going to be data that's going to drive these decisions, and digital will be an outsized player in that.
It's encouraging to hear that you stand committed to it as we all work to figure it out, because it has been such a point of frustration with the payment and trying to create that value. Yet still, 16 of the 22 that presented last week had some kind of digital component. So you're bullish about a market that we're still figuring out, and you're still putting the wagons behind it, and that's the true action of a pioneer in the area. How are we going to innovate if we're not willing to push the envelope? And that's exactly what's going on right now. So we all appreciate it because we're all figuring it out together. And I'm hearing from leaders all the time that are concerned and frustrated, but have this visceral belief that this is where we need to go. It's in the patient's best interest. It's in the payer's best interest. It's in the clinician's best interest. Getting there is tougher. I mean, FDA is a little, they're slower to catch up on this, rightfully so. They have to put safety and efficacy behind everything they stamp. So I get it, but sitting where you sit, you have decisions of, well, this one's simple. This is a product that has been paved. It has been created, and I could go this route, or I could look at these novel technologies, and they're doing things a different way and have huge outcomes, but it may be a little bit tougher to get there. And it sounds like you're balancing well.
I believe that these technologies will ultimately be successful, and it's just a question of is whether they're going to get acquired before they have the evidence to support them in terms of payment, or whether it's going to be afterwards. these companies, in most cases, these technologies are going to make their way to patients. I'm saying in our particular cohorts, because we're just so selective in who we're choosing. But it will not be easy. It will not be a quick, oh, you've made it to MedTech Innovator. Now you're just gonna, your road to payment is done. No, it's a hard journey. We're just going to help quite a bit on that journey and make sure everyone is as informed as possible about how to do it the right way. It is not a linear process where you do this and then in a serial fashion, then you do that, and then you do that. Everything's in parallel. I heard someone, I can't think who it was. I want to give them the citation, but I can't give them the right credit for attribution. But somebody had said, innovation should be happening at payment and reimbursement should be happening at the whiteboard stage. Now, thinking about payment, before you literally put that pen on the whiteboard, you should be thinking about the payment model. So that is really the way these companies are thinking. And if they're not, we make sure they are. We make sure that we inject that thinking into the process. From the day they start pitching us, we ask those questions, and then of course we work on their plan in a value program that we've been running here for many years. And so I think ultimately the data, the digital component of this, these companies generally aren't, what they're not is digital companies in most cases. So not all of them. Some are purely digital and purely software, but almost every one of the companies that comes through MedTech Innovator will have some kind of hardware device component. Almost everyone, not all of them. A lot of them like to identify as digital because sometimes it's easier to raise capital and with a higher valuation when you call yourself a digital company. But ultimately, whether they're truly a digital company, a device company, there's digital in them. The DNA, the software component of this, FDA is caught up in many cases now with the digital component of what these companies need to be doing. So it's really ultimately then making sure that they're proactively set up to have the evidence that the payers are going to need to pay for these technologies. And that's the part that hasn't caught up yet is payment. And we're getting there, but we're not there yet.
Well, it's a great road we've come on. We've come a long way in the last 10 years since software as a medical device was coined a term, believe it or not. It's like you turn around and things all of a sudden have caught up, and hopefully that'll continue, especially for these young companies. Well, we chatted about device talks. Is there anything beyond MedTech Innovator, if you had even an opportunity to see anything at Device Talk, anything that stayed with you after the meeting last week?
I think Device Talks in general, I got to see some of the keynote presentations mainly because then I was off in our showcase room with our innovators and out in the hallway with all those conversations you were talking about after the showcases. I did get to see some of the keynotes. I love listening to always the stories behind why executives are doing what they're doing. As I said, whether it's our startups or whether it's the large strategics and people like Tom Pollan over at BD talking about why he got into the business in the first place. You just hearing those stories as to why someone does this versus being in another business where, as I said, frankly, things are easier. It's a lot easier to go start a photo sharing app than it is to run a medical technology company. Right. And so, making those decisions every day and coming to work and dealing with, all the things that people have to deal with in our industry on top of just running a business takes a special kind of person. So I think those are always my favorite thing, is to listen to the stories as to why people are doing what they're doing, what drives them, why they're excited about it. This industry remains, regardless of the financial environment we're in, whether it's this cycle or one of the other ones before us, there's always cycles. This industry remains a very, very incredible place to work because you get that double bottom line, right? You can still make money, you can still make a profit, but you can have such an impact. And that's the thing that, I think I've loved seeing an increase at Device Talks this year and other conferences of hearing patient stories as well, and how, and what the impact is on the patient. Because for years, my number one piece of feedback that I've given startups as they've presented is, where's the patient in your presentation? They forget, that you see this very technical presentation and all the numbers and their plan and all this stuff. And I literally go like, the only thing I saw was something that looked like either like the liver being burned or the heart being, operated on, but where was the actual patient? Like, can I see a patient on a slide somewhere? Who are we talking about here? Because these patients look like our wives and our husbands and our children and our parents. And it really, when you see the patient and you listen to the patient, the people tell their stories, about, one of our companies, Green Sun Medical, who won MedTech Innovator in 2016. They're working with scoliosis, with young girls who were wearing these rigid braces that were really stopping them from being, enjoying the physical activities, and of course leading to a lifelong, change in their health and their ability to participate in some of these activities. And they were, proposing a dynamic brace that, could be adjusted and that was incredibly flexible and dynamic, kind of like Invisalign for your teeth, but for a brace. And now fast forwarding and seeing girls who are, teenage girls wearing their brace and bending over backwards and doing all this crazy stuff that you could never do in the old braces. Like, that's the stuff that's so moving. And listening to them talk. That's why we do this. That's what I got out of Device Talks, were some of those conversations. And that's what drives us, right? Ultimately, it's helping people live longer, healthier lives. I'm just thrilled that we're able to do it. And I'm thrilled that Device Talks and other conferences are giving those stories a stage.
Couldn't agree more. That's our number one reason for being. I'm glad you remind everyone of that, because they are our families out there, right? They are our kids, our spouses, our grandma. Whether it's today or at some point down the road, we're all impacted by medical technology and this innovation. So it's a great world we play in. And I am so grateful for your time today, Paul, and sharing with us. As much as I've read and studied and followed you over the years, I learned so much from our conversation today. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you very much, Holly. It's a pleasure to be here. And, I've certainly followed what you and everyone is doing over at Mullings. And, it's such an important part of this business. And, I'm just thrilled to be able to have the conversation.
Likewise. Thank you for joining us. And to the audience that listened today, thank you for joining us on Tech Talks. We'll see you next time.